those that have passed and pay our respects to the victims senselessly lost by these crimes. Once again, welcome to the 13 days of Halloween, and let's jump into the video. Hello my friends, welcome to video number 8 for the 13 days of Halloween. Today's video will be, you guessed it, another Halloween themed true crime. Shocking, I know. But this one is, I would say, maybe somewhat well known. Maybe not. This may be the first time you've heard it. But I hope you stick around, relax, and enjoy today's video. So today we are going to talk about what has been referred to as the trick or treat murder. We expect goblins, ghosts, and ghouls to roam the streets on All Hallows Eve. But what we don't expect is murder. However, as we know, the unexpected does happen, and we will talk about that today. October 31st of 1957 was a school night. Kids scored their Butterfinger bars and homemade caramel apples and were in bed at home safe by a decent hour because they had school the next day. 35-year-old Peter Fabiano, his wife Betty, and teenage stepdaughter Judy Solomon had just retired for the evening. Peter's stepson Richard Solomon had left earlier that night to return to his Navy base in San Diego. This is going to be about the Fabiano Halloween murder that quickly became known as a murder scandal that captivated the Los Angeles area in California and beyond in the 1950s. That night, Joan Rabel and Goldine Beiser sat in a parked car outside of the Fabiano home. They were watching and waiting for the lights in their home to go out so they could make their move. They watched the lights turn off throughout the house, room by room, with the last light shutting off in the master bedroom where Peter and Betty would sleep and were ready for bed. Once the last light in the house went off, Joan told Goldine, quote, "All right, go do it." Goldine would get out of the car dressed in jeans, a khaki coat, red gloves, and heavy makeup that she covered up with a domino mask. She walked straight to the Fabiano home front door and rang their doorbell. As you can imagine, Betty and Peter were not expecting anybody when their doorbell rang shortly after 11 p.m. I think they knew that this was too late for a trick-or-treater, but Peter's judgment got the best of him. Peter and little late for this, isn't it?" And he would finish this sentence as he began to open the door. He would get a response of no. And that is all Goldine would say as she raised up a brown bag. But this brown bag was not intended to collect any candy, but rather her hands were holding something inside of the bag, but out of sight of Peter. I'm sure you can guess that there was a gun inside of the bag. She pulled the trigger. The sound of the bullet being fired rang through the street. The bag would explode, and Peter would fall where he stood in the doorway. Now, when all of this had happened, Betty had heard Peter have this brief conversation with somebody at the front door. She said that she heard but did not recognize two adult voices other than Peter's. One sounded masculine and another like a man impersonating a woman. And then Betty would hear a noise that sounded like a pop. That noise would bring her daughter Judy out of bed in a hurry, and together they ran to the front door where they found Peter lying on his back just inside the front door going into their home. Goldine did not wait to see if Peter was dead or if anyone had seen her. She ran back to the car where Joan was waiting. As Goldine got in, Joan leaned over and kissed her, saying, "Thank you." The two women left and quickly burned their clothes in case they contaminated any trace evidence. Afterwards, they returned the getaway car to the friend they had borrowed it from earlier that day. When the two women had completed their mission, Joan said to Goldine, "Forget you ever knew me." And then they went their separate ways. The next day, Goldine realized that she still had the murder weapon, a Smith & Wesson .38, and she had no idea what to do with it. So she went down to a downtown Los Angeles department store where she rented a locker and left the gun. So, when Betty and Judy come to see Peter lying on his back inside of their home after hearing the shots go off, they realize that he is unconscious and that he had been shot one time. It appeared as though the bullet entered his chest just below his heart. Judy would run 2 doors down to Bud Alper's home, who was a member of the Los Angeles Police Department assigned to the Valley Division, which Judy knew. She banged on his door until Bud answered. She would tell him what transpired, and he immediately contacted the Valley Division, and several police officers arrived within minutes to the scene of this crime. Peter would be transported to Sun Valley Receiving Hospital, where he would succumb to the massive bleeding that he suffered from this gunshot wound. He never regained consciousness, and Betty actually had to be sedated for days after the shooting because she was so distraught. She was not able to really function at all, and certainly not able to help the police in their investigation and search. Finally, a few days passed where Betty no longer had to be sedated, and she was able to compose herself and speak with police. She would share with them that she heard two voices coming from downstairs, a man and someone that sounded like a man pretending to be a woman. The first thought was that this was a gang shooting. Los Angeles was suffering from gang problems dating back to the 1950s, and Peter had been charged years before with bookmaking in the 1940s before he moved to California. If you're not familiar, a bookmaker or bookie is an organization or a person that takes bets on sporting and other events at agreed upon odds. They are often connected to a particular criminal organization, although some do operate independently. And so at the time, this was illegal, and in the 40s, Peter had been charged with this prior to his move to Los Angeles. But since being in the Sunshine State of California, he had opened a string of hair salons and did not fall back into his bookie ways, so they didn't quite think that this was tied to any gang-related homicide intent after all. They also considered the motive of attempted robbery, but detectives found no evidence of this. They would question Betty just about their marriage and Peter in general, and she told the police that they got married in 1955, and together they ran two successful beauty shops, and as far as she knew, he had no true enemies. Detectives would also interview friends of Betty and Peter, as well as relatives, but they also offered nothing in the way of suspects. But a week later, a confidential tip led detectives to a very bizarre murder plot. This tip would point to the name of Joan Rabel. Betty would not initially tell police of a relationship that she had had with Joan, but she would just call her a family friend. Now, around the same time, the gun had been found in a downtown department store, and after a ballistics test, they found that it matched the bullet fired into Peter Fabiano's chest. Once they did a search of the weapon, it showed that it was registered to a Goldine Pizer, a lab assistant at the local children's hospital. And clearly to them, no one that had ever been on the police's radar for any kind of crime, and definitely not in connection to the Fabianos. Goldine Pizer, a 43-year-old widow, admitted to the slaying when she was arrested at her Hollywood home on November 12th. Goldine would tell the Los Angeles Police Department Detective Sergeants Charles Stewart and Pat Kelly, quote, "It's a relief to get it off my mind." She said a friend of hers, 40-year-old Joan Rabel, who was a former employee at one of the Fabiano's beauty shops, had talked her into committing the crime. She would tell police in the interrogation room that this entire already interviewed Joan Rabel several times, but she consistently claimed to know nothing about the murder. And so they would move towards getting an arrest warrant, and Joan Rabel would get a lawyer. Goldine and Joan had been friends for years, and Goldine claimed that they had planned this murder for 3 months. She was quoted saying, "All we talked about was Peter Fabiano." Joan described him as a vile, evil man, one who destroyed all the people about him. She developed a deep hatred for him. End quote. On September 21st, Goldine purchased that handgun from a gun shop in Pasadena, California. She had told the man behind the counter she needed the weapon for home protection. A few days later, Joan drove Goldine back to the shop where they picked up the gun with 2 bullets in it, ready to go. Joan actually paid for the gun, but Goldine kept it until Halloween night when Joan picked her up in their getaway car. Goldine would also tell police, quote, "Joan came over to my house with some clothing, blue jeans, khaki jackets, hats, eye masks, makeup, and red gloves. We dressed up, got in the car, and drove to Fabiano's home, arriving there about 9 p.m. The 2 women had driven by the Fabiano's home before, so Joan could point out who Peter was and what he looked like to Goldine, so she would recognize him when the time came. On Halloween night, the women waited until the lights went out in the Fabiano home. Goldine would tell them about how she would ring the doorbell and would ring it a second time when she got no answer, but Peter would open the door on the second ring, which is when she brought the gun up with both hands and fired. She would then run back to the getaway car that Joan was driving, and they would head back to Mrs. Barrett's home, which was the home of Margaret Barrett, whom Joan had borrowed the car to commit the murder. They left the car on the street, separated, and walked to their homes, which is when Joan had said, "Forget you ever knew me or forget you ever saw me. There's mixed reports, but it's one of the 2. So the question though is, how did this happen and why? Why did Joan want Peter to die? It's simple, really. Peter stood in the way of Joan's plan to get much, much closer to his wife, Betty. Before his death, Peter had asked Betty to end her friendship with Joan, which you remember, they were considered family friends, and upon Peter's request, Betty complied. Peter and Betty Fabiano had met in the late 1940s in New York. Peter had gotten out of the Marines and was a truck driver, and Betty was a pretty divorcee with 2 children. They would find that they hit it off pretty quickly, and so they would get married not too long after. They moved to Los Angeles in 1956, where we know that they opened and operated 2 beauty salons. Peter had hired Joan to work in one of the shops, and this is how she first came into their lives. Now, even as the Fabiano's life looked to be coming together from an outsider's perspective, falling apart. Betty found herself needing some space and decided to move out of the family home and spend some time living with Joan. Now, during this time period, people closest saw that these two women, Betty and Joan, were romantically involved, and they would consider it abnormal. This was a period of time where homosexuality was illegal in California. Los Angeles has always been a progressive city, and California in general is a very progressive state, but again, this was the 1950s, and progressiveness only went so far. After a while of Betty being separated from Peter, she decided that she wanted to work on her marriage and left Joan to return to Peter and her life. Somehow Peter had found out about their relationship, and those close to him reported that he felt very threatened by it. In fact, Peter was so threatened by it that when he and Betty talked about working on their marriage, she vowed to never have contact with Joan again, which is where this request from Peter to no longer be friends came from. Soon after Betty went back to Peter, Joan realized that her ex-girlfriend was actually serious about fixing her marriage. It sounded like Joan thought that perhaps it wouldn't really last and that she would come back, but soon enough she realized that no, Betty was serious about the rekindling and fixing up the marriage, knowing that at this point she had lost Betty's love. Joan would find Goldine and would start selling her on how horrible of a man Peter Fabiano was and that he just had to die. Joan would actually never elaborate on why she wanted Peter dead. Was it because she wanted to punish Betty for leaving her? Or did she think that with Peter gone, that Betty would come back to her? So let's talk about the consequences that Joan and Goldine faced. The county grand jury returned indictments against the two for Peter's murder. Goldine wept as she told the grand jury of the weird killing that transpired and explained that Joan incited her to commit the murder of a man she did not know by painting him as a symbol of evil. And apparently Joan declined to testify at the grand jury. Rather than face a trial, on March 11th of 1958, Goldine and Joan pled guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Both women were required to meet with 3 psychiatrists. The court seemed to believe that their choice of sexual partners might make them unfit to stand a trial, which I think is wildly interesting. Goldine had been just as open with the psychiatrists as she had been with the police. She was quoted saying, "I had no motive personally. Whatever motive I had was to please Joan. I was always easily influenced. I have been impressionable and always trusted that she had saved her friend Joan from an evil person. End quote. So again, both Goldine and Joan would plead not guilty, and Goldine actually did so on a basis of insanity. Not Joan, however. We know that she did not testify, but she was actually all smiles during the grand jury appearance. It kind of gave off the vibe that she thought the whole thing was a production and everybody was there to see her. Initially, both women had been charged with first-degree murder, but ultimately it was reduced to second-degree murder through a plea deal, as we know, and each woman was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison, which 5 years to life is such a broad period of time. Like, that's so crazy to me. Now, even though Joan never gave a motive, Goldine's testimony was enough for the Los Angeles newspapers and media to understand what was going on, and they told the public what they perceived the motive to be, and it all was on the basis of homosexuality and a lover's quarrel, one of unreturned love that would turn deadly on Halloween night. Now, clearly this murder was so much more than just a woman pulling the trigger on a man. This involves a marriage and an affair, both fighting to win. It's sad because I think that Goldine was mentally unwell and was greatly manipulated by Joan to do her dirty work and to kill Peter Fabiano. It doesn't make it right at all by any means, but I just think it's sad that Goldine either wanted to be loved so desperately, or again was just so mentally unstable that it was an easy choice for her to agree to this murderous plan. I am not sure what happened to Betty Fabiano after this whole murder scandal. If you're familiar with this case and you are able to determine what happened to her, I would be very curious to know. All I saw is that Betty never remarried and she died in 1999. But I do want to say this. Betty never remarried, and we know that up until 1999, same-sex marriage was not legal, and it was still a kind of taboo topic and belief system. Belief system isn't even fair to say. It was just not a well-accepted sexuality, okay? So this is just very clearly my opinion and pure speculation, but I am going to lean on the side of thinking that Betty moved on to have a relationship with a woman. That's just my guess, because she was never remarried. Not to say that